thank you everyone for coming along this afternoon. James and myself, we're going to talk to you about how migrating to Unity Catalog unlocked Diageo's data roadmap. To do some intros. My name is Abigail Bennett. I'm here from a company called Red Kite. We are a data consultancy that specializes in retail and consumer goods. And we have been working with Diageo on their data and AI journey since 2018. Personally, I play the role of our consumer goods industry director. James, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So first of all, thank you for showing the interest in our talk. Great to be in the city. I mean, I got handed a lightsaber today, so I think they asked me, do you want to have a lightsaber? It's like my dream, I think. So what kind of place can you go to that hands you a lightsaber? So it's a great start already. But as the slide says, my name's James Turner. I've been leading Diageo's data transformation for the last few years with the implementation of our Diageo Data Hub, leveraging Databricks. Now, I know many of you probably or may not have heard of Diageo. You may not have heard of Diageo, but hopefully you have heard of some of our brands, or at least enjoyed our brands. So I'm going to ask for a bit of audience participation here, and let's see a show of hands, and we're going to talk about, I'm going to sort of see how your knowledge is on some of our top-selling US brands. So has anyone heard of Crown Royal? Yeah, Crown Royal, Bullet Bourbon, got Guinness. Okay, perfect. So hopefully you've enjoyed our products as much as we do. But we are the global leader in Alka Bevs. We are based in London, UK. That's our headquarters. But we sell over 200 brands across 180 different countries. We've got about 30,000 employees worldwide and 132 production sites. Like most large companies, we to achieve and measure many of our strategic business goals, we obviously rely on trusted information, and certainly to become a more data-driven or insights-led business. At the heart of that, really, for us is a world-class approach to data delivery and data management, which through our Diageo Data Hub, which we consider to be one of our crown jewels in the company. The DDH, as we know it, is our enterprise data platform, and it delivers a centralized, harmonized, and curated data from over 200 data sources, internal, external data sources, operating systems, and from operating systems or third-party data feeds. I'm just going to have to do it, yeah. So why the Unity catalog then? If you just go on to the next slide. Okay, so we've seen an exponential growth, I suppose, since we implemented the DDH. And from about 2019 to 22, you can read the stats on the screen here. We've moved very, very fast to not only onboard a lot of data volume, but also increased adoption of the platform as well, and increased capabilities on the platform as well, in line with Databricks' roadmap. Now, these numbers here have grown and probably doubled even further since then, but it was at 2022 we stumbled into probably what a lot of people, a lot of other companies stumble across as well, you know, from a kind of a curated set of information. It was more turning into a little bit of a swamp. So specifically around some of those areas, you know, we had difficulty finding, sharing, and understanding the data within our platform. Very fragmented and imprecise, quite vague access controls. A proliferation, probably a lot of people can also associate with this, a proliferation of duplication of views of our presented data for downstream consumption, congested workspaces, and bottlenecks in releasing change. Now, I am going to talk in more detail about the benefits, because we have truly recognized benefits from the implementation of the catalog. But at a very high level, we've been able to tighten the controls around access, which is especially important as we've brought PII data into the system now. into the platform, got centralized security management. We've vastly improved the ability to find and understand our data, especially for some of those citizen data discovery and analysts. We've also accelerated our work stream to rationalize our data landscape. We've got a lot of legacy stuff out there. I think having that lineage alone to understand some of those pain points has really helped us with the rationalization journey. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. I am now going to hand over back to Abigail, and Abigail's going to discuss how we've partnered with Redkite to migrate to the Unity catalog.
Thanks, James. So as James said, the DDH is a live environment, and it passes a lot of data to downstream production systems that teams across Diageo rely on. So when we started to think about migrating from Hive Metastore to Unity Catalog, it was really important that we did this migration with the minimum amount of disruption or impact possible. So we started by setting ourselves some pretty ambitious goals for how a successful migration would look. And then we worked backwards to think about how could we achieve those goals and what was the plan that we needed to follow to achieve them. So the goals that we set ourselves, we started with a target 0 downtime for end users. As I said, there were hundreds of developers, hundreds of teams using the data, so we needed to make sure that there was no downtime associated for these teams, given that the processes that they supported were often business critical for Diageo. The second objective was to minimize the reliance on downstream developer teams. And this was really important for 2 reasons. Firstly, because we wanted to reduce the amount of dependencies that we had as a program and therefore reduce the amount of risk that we were carrying. But also because we knew that these were going to be really important stakeholders, we wanted to make their lives as easy as possible and make sure that they were bought into the change and that they could see the benefits that were going to come from the migration. The third objective that we set ourselves was to ensure a smooth transition for live assets. We knew it was important to avoid any disruption possible. So we knew that we were going to have to do lots of testing, lots of parallel run to surface any potential issues or discrepancies before we went live so that we could avoid any disruption. And then the last objective, but probably the most important, was about building and maintaining stakeholder confidence. We had a large set and a very diverse set of stakeholders, including technical teams and business teams. It was a pretty complicated change that we were going to be taking them through. So it was really important that they understood the benefits to them and they were bought into how the cutover was going to work and what it meant for them and how they had to develop in the future. So what was the plan that we came up with to try to achieve some of those objectives? We defined a 4-step process. So prepare, roll out, switch, and accelerate. In the prepare stage, we defined how Unity Catalog was going to look at Diageo, and we set up an alpha version of Unity Catalog, which we could then do some limited testing with a small number of users. We then moved on to rollout. We evolved our alpha version into a beta version, and we enabled that for a much broader set of testers, and we did a large amount of parallel run alongside the Hive Metastore that was still in production. Then we moved into the switch. This is when we actually did the cutover and moved Unity Catalog into production. And then finally accelerate. This is when we switched off Hive Metastore and we actually started to take advantage of the benefits that Unity Catalog provided to address the pain points that Diageo was experiencing. So I'm going to take you through each of the stages in a bit more detail and what we did. So prepare. The objective of this stage was to do as much preparation, as much thinking as possible early on in the process to try to smooth out the rest of the process and try to surface as many issues as quickly as possible as we could. So we took 3 steps, essentially, in this stage. We started by essentially enabling Unity Catalog at Diageo and turning it on in a few selected workspaces. We did a lot of testing at this point about the different access and permission levels. What we found was really important is we had to have dummy accounts with different levels of permissions to test. If we tried to do all of the testing using the team's admin level admin level of permissions, we weren't actually really understanding what the permissions were that we were giving to people, and therefore we weren't really testing the configuration that we had put in. Then we created Data Hub specific catalogs. At this point, we had a lot of discussion back and forth about how to leverage the naming convention change that Unity Catalog provided, moving from a 2-level to a 3-level naming convention. And actually, one of the main lessons that we took from this alpha stage was a change to how we were thinking about doing the naming conventions. So we ended up changing our approach to naming conventions after this alpha stage. We also had a lot of discussion in this stage about how to split Unity Catalog. So we discussed a lot, do we split it by environment? Do we split it by domain? We ended up splitting it by environment. So, sit, dev, prod, etc. We felt like the right answer was probably to split it by domain, but at that point, Diageo wasn't ready in their sort of maturity as an organization, but they are now starting to move towards splitting by domain, so customer, consumer, etc. Then the third stage was to actually develop and deploy an alpha version. So we granted some select users, some who could do some testing at this stage, just on this sort of very initial version to start getting some feedback. Once we'd completed this prepare stage, we then moved into rollout. So what we did in rollout was first, we evolved our alpha version into a beta version. So this is where we took advantage of some of the lessons that we'd learned around naming conventions that I mentioned on the previous slide. We actually moved this into a version that was synced rather than a sort of standalone version that we had for alpha. And this is where we did lots of automated testing. So as I said before, we needed to make sure that there were no nasties lurking in the data so that we knew that when we pushed it into production, we were going to have 0 issues. So we did a lot of automated regression testing, comparing what was in Hive Metastore to what was in Unity Catalog to make sure that everything kind of mapped on perfectly. We then rolled out some read-only access to these catalogs for exploration to downstream users. We found that this was really important for ongoing stakeholder engagement, and the naming conventions that we'd used helped to, we found that they were very intuitive, so people could kind of navigate through the catalog pretty easily, even though it was unfamiliar to them and it was in a sort of read-only state at this point. Then we found a couple of downstream teams that we switched over to the Unity Catalog, this beta version, and actually got them to start using the catalog before it was pushed properly into production. And again, we found this was really helpful from a stakeholder engagement perspective. It helped to give people confidence in the change that was coming, and it meant that people were more familiar with the platform, or sort of more familiar with the catalog, before it actually went into production, and sort of people felt like they weren't being harried into the change. They'd had the time to kind of navigate and explore themselves. We also found we took a couple of lessons from this beta phase. So we found that the runtime versions of Databricks Clustered needed a one-time update, and we also found that the linked ADF services needed to be updated so that you could actually access the Unity Catalog objects. I'm sure I'm seeing some wry smiles, which seems like these are lessons that have been hard won by other people as well. But it was really helpful to obviously learn these at this stage rather than when we actually moved into a switchover. So once we'd done this long phase of sort of parallel run and moving on to with the beta version, we were then ready for this is when it got real, and we were ready to move into the cutover. So we started the switch phase by publishing a very detailed cutover plan. At this point, this is where we flushed out all of the potential remaining dependencies that we had been sort of surfacing and discussing with our stakeholders over the past 2 phases as well. This was, again, really helpful from a stakeholder management perspective because it meant that people were able to really have visibility into what is the plan going to be, have they understood all the dependencies that are relevant, and it gave the downstream teams a visibility into the timeline that they would have to follow to make any changes for their pipelines and for their ingestion into Power BI, etc. Then we actually performed the cutover. So the actual, physical cutover. We sort of repointed all the CI/CD pipelines, and we did a one-time migration of all of the relevant pipelines. After the sort of switchover had happened and we had moved Unity Catalog into production, we then still continued to make Hive Metastore available on a read-only basis. We thought it was important from a stakeholder management perspective that people could still have access to Hive Metastore, but we made sure that it was only on a read-only basis and it would become sort of progressively outdated, you know, as a sort of gentle encouragement to get everyone to using Unity Catalog. And then we gave the downstream teams time to make any changes that they needed to do, you know, to change the naming conventions of the tables they ingested, etc. So after the switch, we then moved into Accelerate. This is when we actually transitioned to BAU. So we published how-to guides to follow some industry best practice. This is when we actually handed over to the operational teams. We deprecated Hive Metastore, we revoked the access and we reallocated resources, and then actually stopped the support that was being given to Hive Metastore. And then finally, we actually started to take advantage of the benefits that Unity Catalog brought, as James mentioned earlier, and sort of were able to address the challenges that had been plaguing the platform beforehand. So a lot of detail there about the process that we followed and the approach that we took. But looking back at the objectives that we set ourselves at the beginning. So how did we actually do against the targets that we set for ourselves? So we started by targeting 0 downtime for end users. And you know, we achieved that. We transferred 600 users, and we did so with 0 downtime for them. We then minimized the reliance on developer teams. So yes, we migrated 500 tables for those teams. And again, we did so with 0 disruption to them. Ensure smooth transition for live assets. So we conducted over 750 regression tests on those tables to make sure that there was no disruption to those tables and no one found any issues after the migration. And then finally, build and maintain stakeholder confidence. So we held fortnightly meetings throughout with our key stakeholder group to make sure that everyone had the visibility that they needed, everyone had a chance to ask any questions, etc. We've called out the fortnightly meetings here as sort of the main thing that we did, but I think the whole approach that we took around parallel run and getting people involved in sort of alpha and beta testing was really helpful in continuing to get stakeholder engagement and building confidence in all of those teams. So, looking back, what did we learn from doing the migration? I'd say that we can divide what we learned into 2 different groups, the delivery approach and then change management. On the delivery approach side, nothing here is necessarily significantly different from how we approached it, but I would say that what we learned sort of reinforced quite a lot of our initial thinking about how to approach the migration. So we started, the first lesson is about the importance of creating a detailed map of downstream dependencies. And this seems pretty obvious. You would expect you need to understand your dependencies, you need to know how you're going to mitigate against them. But I think what we learned just sort of underscored the importance of this. It's impossible to know all of your dependencies at the very beginning, and you will be constantly surfacing new dependencies as you go. So you need to have a way of capturing those dependencies, having a live document that you can collaborate with, and have that sort of shared amongst your team that you can kind of continue to update as you go. The second lesson was about automated testing. So as I said before, our ability to do lots of regression testing was really critical to the success of the migration. And we wouldn't have been able to do so without using automated testing. So that was a really important approach that we took that contributed towards the success of the overall switchover. Third was about using agile delivery methods. So to an extent, you can't really avoid a big bang switchover where you go live with one and you have to deprecate the other. But what we found was leveraging agile delivery principles as much as possible helped to reduce the risk inherent with that kind of big bang approach. So, doing lots of parallel running, making sure that we were doing alpha and beta testing, helped to, reduce the risk and also managing kind of changes in dependencies, changes in scope. The next lesson was about ongoing platform enhancements. The DDH is an enterprise data platform. Every enterprise data platform, there are probably multiple different initiatives running at any one time that will all have impacts on each other. So it's really important to make sure that you've got visibility on everything that's going on across the platform, and that there's a consolidated plan owned by someone somewhere about how all of this has to come together, and the dependencies between the initiatives to be managed. The next one might sound like a contradiction from what I said previously about, reducing the dependency on downstream teams. But I think what we learned is there are things that your downstream developer teams will have to do. You're not going to go into their Power BI DAX code and change how they call up the tables that they are ingesting from. But what you do need to do is minimize the amount of dependency on those teams. So giving them loads of time to familiarize themselves with the changes that they need to make, and actually to make them, so that you're, as far as possible, removing them from your critical path, and therefore reducing the risk that you have with sort of dependencies on those downstream teams. And then the last one is, when we did the implementation, UCX wasn't available, so we didn't use it. But if we were to do this now, we would definitely make sure to use UCX. Moving over to the change management side. So again, a few lessons on this side. First, and this was something that was quite surprising to us, is obviously with our business stakeholders, we knew we were going to have to explain the business value. We were going to have to explain to them, why this was an important thing to do, because they don't know what Unity Catalog is. They don't know what Hive Metastore is. You wouldn't necessarily expect them to. But what was surprised is with lots of our technical stakeholders, they just saw this as a platform migration. They didn't see why it was important. They didn't see why they should care, or why they should have sort of momentum and enthusiasm for this. So we were actually surprised by how much we had to lead with the benefits when talking to these technical teams, and really explain to them, this is how it's going to make your life easier. This is why it's important, so that we could really build the enthusiasm that we needed for a change of this scale. The next one was, there's no such thing as too much or too early communication. You kind of have to plan for the fact that most of your messages will go in one ear and out the other. And so you probably have to be repeating yourself 2 or 3 times before you can be certain that people have actually ingested the message that you're trying to give to them. You will probably feel like you're going a bit mad and that you're repeating yourself. And if you feel like you're repeating yourself, you're probably communicating enough. The next one is to avoid crunch periods. And again, this seems super obvious. Yes, don't do it over quarter end, don't do it over year end. But there will be crunch periods for your downstream teams that you just do not have visibility into. And so understanding those as early as possible is really important. Maybe they've got a big go live, or maybe they use a slightly different reporting cadence to the rest of the business. You're never going to find the perfect moment to do something like this. There will always be some team that says, no, I've got a release, I can't do it at this time. But understanding as much as possible those crunch periods so that you can plan the best feasible option is really important for minimizing the risk, but also keeping your stakeholders happy. And the last one is about considering change appetites. So what we found is that there's only so much change people can absorb at any one time. If there's lots of other big change going on, now might not be the right time to do something like this. Or the other approach that you can take is to bundle together lots of change into one bigger sort of transformation program. That increases the risk and the complexity of what you're trying to deliver, but sometimes it can be easier for people to absorb one big package of change rather than sort of drips and drabs of change over, on a month-by-month basis when people just stop listening and they get bored. So, looking back, no significant shifts from how we approached it, but hopefully some useful lessons, some salient lessons for anyone who's kind of, at this early stage and thinking about maybe doing a Unity Catalog implementation and how to approach it. I'm going to hand back over to James to talk more about the benefits that were realized from the implementation.
Thanks, Abigail. So hopefully there's some food for thought for you there if you're about to embark on this journey, or certainly you're thinking about this as well. I think from a benefits point of view, we're not just talking about theoretical benefits here. We've seen some really tangible practical benefits from the implementation of the Unity catalog. And myself, as I suppose, as a leader in the business, but also a practitioner as well, because I still like to get my hands dirty. I've seen some great benefits here. So this is really going back and circling back on the why we did this, but actually how is it sort of bubbling up and manifesting in terms of benefits for Diageo. And there's a lot on here as well. So I think the first one, access control. The centralized access control from the Unity catalog has really made a step change for us in how we manage the access within the platform. There's a few metrics here which I'd like to go through. So managing data access control is 90% faster. It's much more scalable. The speed to data democratization, I know that's a buzzword at the moment, but that's been improved by 60%, actually getting the right data in the right hands of the people at the right time. And then just from a general sort of auditing and governance control of access, that's now much more easier, much more streamlined, about 75% faster. The second topic is lineage. Now, this is my favorite topic because this alone for me is worth the gold of the Unity catalog. Like I said, I still like to get my hands dirty. I think that the natural generation of the lineage through the catalog has been able things like data discovery, understanding of the information has been a lot easier. And also we've been able to connect this with our enterprise data catalog as well. So not only do we kind of have a better data democratization of people in the platform, but then we've extended that out into our enterprise data catalog for a more business view of the data as well. The scale out of data discovery has probably dropped, we think, about reliance on the central team to talk about the same data, the same understanding of the data by about 50%. The ability to search through the catalog and understand that data and self-serve, especially for a citizen sort of data discovery or analysts, has just been fantastic. And also we're expected to elevate the data literacy of our business by using these capabilities as well. They're very important capabilities for that. Number 3 is the metadata management and lakehouse monitoring. Again, big favorite of this area as well because, being a kind of the owner of the Diageo Data Hub, people are always on my case about data quality, and having kind of the tools in my in my back pocket to be able to validate a lot of the assumptions around the data is very important for me. But certainly the metadata capabilities around data observability, searchability, monitoring, and obviously data quality itself. The trust now that we have when we deliver our programs, our data and analytic programs, that we're able to really showcase things like lineage and obviously, the metrics that they're able to bring together through the metadata from data quality has been a bit of a breath of a fresh air for me. The capability around to improve the data operations and support and response of our kind of service operations team has sped things up by about 4 times, we think. And also we're making that move from being more of a reactive to a proactive team in terms of data quality. So, gone are the days, well, almost gone are the days of us having a report after the fact, when you can actually spot things in almost real time. It means that we can, remediate a lot quicker before our business partners get their hands on the data. And finally, data sharing, delta sharing through the Unity catalog, complemented with the access control that I talked about earlier. It's really highlighted the principle of store once, share multiple times. So that's really benefited in many areas, especially in terms of the amount of resource that we had to put in place to be able to do that in the first place. So now we see a reduction of about 3 full-time employees, I think, per project to do that. And also through the delta sharing, we think that for a medium-sized project where we're looking at about 5 to 10 data assets, we've been able to improve the time to market by around 15 times. So there's lots of rich stuff there, and I must sort of emphasize these are real practical benefits that people are seeing, so not theoretical as well, which is nice. we've obviously, I'd be remiss not to talk about our partnership with obviously Databricks as well. We've got our solution architects in the front row, so I'm sure you can talk to her if you want to afterwards about how they've supported us. But certainly this wraps up the session for us today. And again, I really do appreciate you attending and taking an interest in this subject and supporting our talk. We are going to be taking questions, but I think the best thing to do is if you just come over to us so we can put the mics down and have a chat with you rather than anything else. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you making time over lunch.